So I could not bring myself to have printed in the bulletin the title I really wanted to use. And you can call me what you will, but I really wanted to call this It Ain't Over. And so I had to compromise and say it's not over. Even a contraction is a bit informal for what I like to see in print. But I realized it is not over. It just didn't have a title ring. But it's as Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. It ain't over yet. It's the truth. We look at circumstances, we look at our setting, we look at things, especially when things get bad, when things are rough, when things are difficult. And it's easy to get into that condition, that situation, all of those things that surround us, and let it pile up on us. And feel like this is it. This is the end. I don't know how I can continue on. Today is hard. How can there be a tomorrow when today is so hard? Some of you might be in that situation in this season in your life right now. Or maybe not. Maybe today is not hard for you. The sun is shining. It's beautiful. It's not raining. Somebody brought me down a little bit before the service by saying, it's supposed to rain all week, though. Thank you. I hadn't been following the weather and just got home last night. I was just enjoying this. I didn't even turn on the lights in the sanctuary this morning because I thought, oh, the sun's so beautiful. Even the picture, one of the pictures I put on Facebook, it's looking through that window with the sun just sort of washing out everything in the camera. But when things are going well, it's easy to forget how dark they've been some other times. I have a friend who thought that the judge was going to rule one way, but while I was away last week, found out that the judge ruled a different way, and now my friend is going to be in jail for some months more. And I know that that's hard, because this person thought that they would be getting out, and was counting the days and hours until this hearing. And now I can't even imagine the despair. I don't know how bad that must feel, but I realize that it can't feel that far away from Lazarus lying in the tomb. A few years ago, I was visiting somebody in the hospital. The doctors had treated one thing, the reason that he went into the hospital. But while he was there, he started to get sicker and sicker, worse and worse. And they kept giving him more medicine, different medicine. And he got worse and worse. And they couldn't put their finger on what it was. His family was very worried. I imagine he was worried. I imagine he looked at things at that point and thought, I may not be that far from Lazarus. I may not be that far from having to meet my Maker. About 5 years ago, I shared a story. On the plane last night, Melanie asked what I was going to be preaching about today, and I was telling her. And this next example, she said, I think you've used it before. I said, yes, I did. I used it 5 years ago. So if you remember it, I'm really, really impressed. But in Porto Alegre, Brazil, a reformed drug dealer named Zé das Drogas decided that he wanted to make an area of restoration for other people who had been in the pits like he was. Now, his background, he was a reformed drug dealer. He wasn't a planner. He wasn't somebody who was an organizer. And so he went and squatted on a piece of land, sort of a hilltop. And it became an absolute horror of despair. Because as word got out that this was a place you could bring people that were suffering, relatives, even hospitals, began to deposit people there who couldn't afford to get care for their ailments. And what was supposed to be this little slice of heaven that reflected his epiphany, his sense of God's calling, became very much a living hell. And there was one woman, a middle-aged woman, who when the author of the article I read about was visiting there. He went up and she had pinchinos, which are little parasites. And it appeared that she had all these holes in her head. And there were these little parasites that had been eating her flesh. And she was there in this place, this horrible, desolate place, waiting with death. That's what the author referred to it. She was waiting with death, alongside death. Can you imagine trying to see a tomorrow in a place like that? Can you imagine trying to believe that there's a reason to hope, there's a reason to keep fighting, to keep struggling? All over the world we can find difficult situations. We don't have to go to Brazil. Last year when my son Dean and I went to Haiti and we took walks outside the university where I was teaching, he noticed people who had no clothes. And he shared that with Karen Cox when we got back. That was one of the things we looked at trying to do something about, some sort of mission project about. But unfortunately, in this past week, when Melanie and I were there and again took walks outside the university, we saw the same thing. We don't have to go to Haiti. We don't have to go to Brazil. The first two examples I used about people who have trouble seeing a tomorrow, seeing a future, are from right here in our own community, our own faith community. Often, when we think things are bleak, we lose hope. We can even lose faith and forget that God is powerful, that God is the creator of all that is. The story of Lazarus is so wonderful because it can teach us many things. As is the case in the Gospel of John, there's always more going on than meets the eye. Martha's statement of faith is one that is powerful and incredible. It can remind us of a testimony of saying, I do believe. I do believe in Jesus. I do believe that you can. I do believe that no matter what, you are capable. From Lazarus, we also learn that the bringing him back to life was not a bringing him back to a fairy tale happily ever after. We don't get a Disney ending here. It seems like it. But I can imagine Lazarus later on, maybe a few years later, stubbing his toe and going, that really hurt. Or going through a very difficult time in his own life, maybe even after Jesus' death, and not knowing what was going to happen. Saying, Jesus, did you just bring me back to experience this? See, Lazarus teaches us that we come back from the pits to life. But instead of focusing on that back to life aspect of the story, which is one of my favorite parts of the Lazarus story, this morning I want to focus on rebirth amidst death. Lazarus, for many of us, is a very familiar story. The title, The Raising of Lazarus, gives away the ending. We know from the start, but Jesus is going to deliver in the end. We know from the very moment we flip to John 11 where this is going. If your Bible is like many others, it has little labels in it that tell the titles and story. The one I use now doesn't, and I've used this for years. It has them at the top of the page, but for this page, it includes Lazarus, but it doesn't label it that way. And I kind of like that because you have to engage in the story, because real life is like that. No matter what happens in this story, we know it's going to be okay. But when we started where I began in verse 17, we see Jesus arriving at a funeral. His friend, his close friend Lazarus, has been dead for 4 days. And we can start chasing the question, why did you delay, Jesus? He heard about Lazarus' illness back in verse 1 of chapter 11. He had gone over across the Jordan where John the Baptist had been baptizing. He had spent some time there and he had received word that, hey, your very close friend Lazarus is sick. You should go see him. But when Jesus hears it in John 11:4, he's like, don't worry about it. It's all going to be good for God's glory. Well, that's fine. Unless you're Lazarus. That's great unless you're the one who's going through the pits of despair. That's great unless you're the one who's sick. Or you're the one who's in prison. You know, this is going to be okay for you at the end. You can say that. They don't lock the door at your house at night and keep you in. We all hear about things and do nothing. It's universal. It applies to all of us. We hear about kids in our area who, once school's out, the backpack program is over, they're not going to have the meals, the consistency of their meals for the summer until school starts again. We hear about people in jail, but more often we hear about people who are sick, who probably could use a visit, who could probably use somebody showing up and saying, you're not forgotten. We still know about you. We still love you. Your name is on the prayer list. And I saw it there, and so I just thought I'd drop on by to see how you're doing. We know about all kinds of things. We know about Haiti. We know about Brazil. We know about the mudslide in Washington and the shooting in Fort Hood. How many shootings? I don't know. I see these reports every now and then with a map and the dots of all the mass shootings. It's just shocking. But you know what? It's not too late. Because for each one who is here today, each one who hears this message, whether you're here, whether you're with someone at the later service, or whether they see it on the live stream or on YouTube, or they hear it over the radio, everybody who hears this message has this new day, has the opportunity to get involved, has the chance to do something. In the flight home yesterday from Providenciales to Miami, it's kind of a circuitous route to get back, but the flight attendant said, thank you, welcome aboard, I have a few announcements to make, but before we begin our announcements, would everybody on the plane please turn to the person next to them and say good morning. And it was kind of funny, because then there was a pause and sort of a rumbling throughout the plane, good morning, good morning. And it was, the flight attendant then made a joke about it, said, isn't that a nice way to start? You can all be kind to each other. Now you don't have to talk to that person the rest of the flight. Being nice, reflecting God's love, and other little gestures are ways that we can get involved. Because Lazarus doesn't stay in the tomb. Jesus does show up, and Lazarus is raised from the dead. The story wasn't over when Lazarus attended his own funeral. Martha says, Lord, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. Wow, what a powerful statement. But you know what? I hear it all the time. Not with that emphasis on faith, not with that belief that God is capable. God can do more than we can ever ask or even imagine. But I hear it in a sense of a plaintive cry. God, you could have prevented that. As in, why didn't you? You've got some explaining, like Ricky Ricardo. Lucy, you got some explaining to do. You know, I mean, can you imagine saying that to God when I put it that way? God? No. Lord, if you had been here. Of course, Martha. Of course. But the story's not over yet. It ain't over till it's over. Lazarus does rise. Jesus calls him out of the tomb, and he returns to life. Getting an illness isn't the end. Going to jail isn't the end. Not even growing up in a Haitian orphanage. Not even growing up with so few possessions in a little tiny shack along the side of the road in Haiti. Thursday this past week, Monel Jules, the dean of the School of Theology who I work for when I go to teach, and I were talking about wealth. And by Haitian standards, he's very well off. He has a job. His wife has a job, although she's working less because they're expecting their third child. Yay for them. It's really good. They're excited about that. But they have a house, they have television, they have a lot of things. But compared to any one of us, any one of us here, Monell is not well off. He's not really that wealthy. But he said to me something very striking about poverty and what it's like to live with poverty. He said, at least I can afford to dream. See, he can look toward the future. He's got enough that he plans ahead. He's planted a church, and it's amazing the way that church has grown in just 1 year since I saw it a year ago. When I saw it a year ago, they were building one of the walls of the sanctuary, and there was a dispute. The contractor in Monell, he realized that the contractor decided it needed less rebar than the architect said it needed. And so he had to get that working. But now it's got a roof, and it's continuing to improve. And he can look toward the future and dream. Can you imagine a life where you can't even afford to dream? You're trying just to survive. When Lazarus dies, we know what happens. We know what's just around the corner. We have the advantage of being able to read ahead. But in real life, we don't know what happens next. We have to have faith that God is still in charge, still in control, still active in the world and participating in our life. In real life, we can't read ahead. We can hope and we can have faith. And there is a reason to have hope, have faith, because it's not over yet. Calling Lazarus back from death isn't the end, it's the beginning of the rest of his life. But the truth is, it's hard to have that kind of faith. It's hard when you're the one going through the difficult chapter. It's hard when life is piling up on you, grinding you. It's hard to live with this kind of faith because we want to read to the end. We want to be able to go, this is the story of Matt's happily ever after. Life isn't like that. We have uncertainty. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And we pull those words out. We don't realize the context sometimes in which he says them. Martha's response is one of profound faith. And coming back from the grave gave Lazarus the opportunity to live for God. Just like each day that we have, each gift that we have is the opportunity for us to live for God.